Hi, I'm Kira. I'm a multidimensional director, and over the past decade, I've worked at the forefront of immersive entertainment and XR, blending storytelling and emerging technology to create experiences that challenge the boundaries of what's possible. I've worked with many leading technology brands and directed on the world's largest volumetric stage. Now it's time to open a space for brilliant minds to share their visions for the future of experiences. Through my eyes, you'll discover unique perspectives that redefine what it means to see beyond reality. Welcome to Portal to the Next Stage. So I'm joined today with Caitlin Krause, a friend, a colleague, a brilliant human being. Caitlin is a multi-published author. She has written Mindful by Design, Designing Wonder, Digital Satori, and many other collections of poetry. And there's a good feeling of poetry, even I feel like woven into this book. And now, today, we'll do a deep dive on her latest book, Digital Wellbeing.
Fantastic. Thank you. You got it. And I feel honored, Kira, both to be here with you on this special day, special time. It feels like we're having a ceremony. Mm-hmm. And I often say humans are missing these moments to really mark them as you pass through to the next. So this time together is really celebrating that in a ritual to be here and be in conversation. This book especially was meant to be alive in conversation, not a static piece of text. And I think back as you say all the names of the books, and if you notice some of the words, digital satori matching with the digital well-being, or mindful by design with designing wonder, all of them have angles and facets of overlaps in terms of the ethos. So
I have thought about that. As I've been studying through your past work and knowing you as a human being, it has felt like your own haiku. Mm-hmm. Putting those pieces together like mm-hmm. Caitlin's own poetic puzzle. And I think it's such a key piece to who you are, as you're inspiring us to think more about wonder and awe in day-to-day life and how we deal with technology and this idea of being digital. So being in process and creating something and knowing how often you spend time in nature and reading that too, as you were writing pages out in nature. Mm-hmm. I really felt that. And as I would read chapters, I try to go out into nature and feel like I was more connected to it. And I experienced wonder at so many points when I was reading this. And I don't know if the book helped me connect to wonder, or it was you singing through the trees somehow. But it's like I remember reading this one section one day, and I just walked out, and it's like every tree was singing with birds.
Awareness. It's all of, I think, yes and to what you're saying is really special to me, because I found it amazing. So many people have told me similar things, and this book is just starting to reach more people, but they've said, hey, I work with technology, and suddenly I had this book and I decided to bring it outside. It's all you when you hear the birds. Maybe the book is also inviting a certain sensory awareness where you start to notice them more because of what you're reading.
That resonates. Right. It's helping me awaken to that even more.
Yeah. Yeah. And the hard part for me was to then, writers and artists, we love creative constraints. So I had to set up almost the framework, like the architecture of what would each chapter's focus be, or what would this topic be that would give me the boundaries where, as I'm writing, of course, it could be fully stream of consciousness or writing a muse-like meditation, but I also wanted it to be strategic and precise. Like, don't lead you down some pathway where there's no practical application, So.
Yes. There's a lot of practical takeaways, and I think so much of that comes through in those reflection sections too, where it almost feels like you've worked a workbook or a guidebook into the middle of the book. It gives you moments to really think about things as you ask us these very personal questions. And then there's questions for leaders too, so you feel like you could take them into business and really practice them day to day. I definitely want to unpack this title, because you talk about language, and this cover is beautiful too. Maybe we can zoom in on a close-up there for a moment.
What do you like about the cover or the colors or anything?
I like a lot about it. It's like when I look at it, I feel peace from it. You talk in the book about the multitudes within us.
Yeah.
And when I look at it, there's something about multitudes shining through. It's like I'm going to pick it up again. It's like there's a rainbow of light, but it's shining back at us. So it feels like it's reflecting our true nature back at us.
Yeah.
And that if we find the light, maybe we can rediscover the multitudes within us.
So I'll describe, and I love the word multitudes. That's in the book too, the phrase by Walt Whitman, we contain multitudes. So the different angles, I didn't realize, it's kind of a joke, don't judge a book by its cover. And I want people to both suspend disbelief or judgment. I guess that's a prime message of the book. I'll have people say to me sometimes, oh, you speak from a different lens. I thought I wasn't a mindfulness person, and they use that phrase like, I thought I wasn't a meditator, or, we can talk about that in a bit. But I wanted this book to reach across barriers or preconceived barriers where people were saying, I don't self-identify with the word wellness. I heard a podcast recently where they were talking about wellness, meaning you have to fix something and you're broken, versus this idea of intersectional curiosity. Like, what does it mean to be a scientist and an artist? Or what does it mean to be in productions like we are and incorporate theater and also understand technology and the backstory of mechanics? So I have a lot of different backgrounds in my life, and I wanted this book to reach out to people, especially leadership in big organizations where they might feel that friction of, hey, I have to implement AI right now. I need to do those things. And I have a background in technology and in programming, and I've been studying AI, but I didn't want to write a book about the robotic future and turning away from tech, or a book about merging two things. One of the first covers was a robot arm meeting a human arm. And that's exciting, but it's also maybe a little bit derivative. It's what we would expect.
Right.
Or a well-being book. There could be something like a flower, something blooming. And that's also wonderful. And it's expected. And I thought, how am I going to surprise and delight people with a cover that's actually speaking about elevating to a new way of thinking and feeling and looking at tech not as the enemy, but technology and human as a potential for thriving without turning away from our rich creativity and humanity. So I knew I had to hit the note right, and I played around. So with that cover, there were a lot of different designs that I went to, and I said to the publisher, this is the mood I want to get across. And then they came back with this image, and I fell in love. Just like you were saying, yeah. I said, this is right. This shining light is right. This book is not a strictly spiritual book, but it has a soul. It has a soulful kind of nature to it. So I wanted it to also embody that. I wanted it to be three-dimensional and something where someone could say, hey, that's something I haven't seen before with the title that is a topic.
Right,
So,
with having
yeah.
this word digital in it, and then these sort of little almost like fractals or pixels that are expanding out as well, which gives it a digital element.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting. There's something that you remind us about in the book, which is that even just our human beings, like to me, there's so much in this title, the fact that we are beings, and you're reminding us about, our digits. You talk about our fingers and our digits. I'm curious if you could explain for us well-being, how you've unified those words together, because sometimes we see them separated or hyphenated, and just take us through the title, what this means, and how it relates to us as human beings.
So beautiful. And I think you're the first person since the book came out to focus on that digits coming from the fingers and digital. I say sometimes phygital, like physical digital, and all different kinds of crossovers between how we view this topic that can be thought of in a very, again, binary way, like digital meets well-being. First off, I I had a book launch that was in VR this week. So there was a party that was happening, just a very small one to mark the moment. And I said to people that were there, I'm aware that well-being right now, it's pretty 50-50. Do you hyphenate that word? I think you brought up that, well-being, you'll see it with a hyphen. And I was joking with people, this is about a 300-page book, and by reducing the hyphen, I save myself one keystroke. And if one keystroke is maybe 0.5 seconds, I might have saved myself half an hour of typing the word. So we were laughing about that because I think when you hyphenate, for me as a writer, all it does is create a little speed bump. Maybe that's a good one, but it causes a reader to think, oh, well-being. And it's a proper phrase also to hyphenate. It's grammatically correct. But for me, the fluidity of having it be one word meant that it could rise above and be, again, not about fixing anything that's broken, not about operating from sort of this idea of needing something, but an elevation to this idea of what does it mean to thrive? And what does it mean to thrive where we don't have to be afraid of technology, and it's a yes and we can increase our awareness about what we need as biological creatures. So in a layer stack, just imagine if we were nesting dolls, that we have our physical animal, and that's going to be our biological nature. And then I see these integrations happening more and more. They say great design is invisible. We'll have more and more invisible tech design in the future that lets people augment, and yet it shouldn't stop the human-human connection. It shouldn't stop my emotional awareness and what it means to have a pure relationship with another human or with nature. If that's mediated by technology, then great, as long as it doesn't take away the beauty of what it means to be human. And there are many angles. I could talk a lot more about your question because I think your question is so precise. And right now, maybe in a few years, people won't talk about digital with that term anymore. But I'm teaching the course at Stanford called Digital Wellbeing. And right now in the world, that topic is something that has resonance where people need more guides who have a background like I do. I haven't seen anyone else in the field talking about it this way with a lot of imagination and creativity. So I felt like if I title it that and put it out there with the imagination and wonder as the subtitle, people will gravitate, especially people who need this in business and want to do it in a way that doesn't burn them out and doesn't, have them go into the matrix.
So it's interesting that you chose to unhyphenate, to let the words flow into each other. I'm curious if you feel like the world and humans within the world right now, are we trending towards flow or are we hitting the speed bumps?
Both. We're hitting awareness. And awareness for me has to be good. And I'll give you an example. A friend of mine who I interviewed in the book built an app called ClearSpace. And ClearSpace, his name is Royce Brannig. He's one of the founders. And the app allows people to set their intention before they go to their phone and social media. They give themselves a certain threshold, an intention. Oh, I want to use this many apps. I want to use them for this amount of time per day. You could decide you wanted to use them for 20 hours and that would be fine. ClearSpace just wants your intention.
You could binge watch television if you wanted to.
As long as it's your choice. And his emphasis is that right now you can't claim ignorance anymore. I think a lot of people hopefully they can't just say, oh, I'm at the mercy of large tech companies that suck me in and have algorithms that take my attention away and then increase my addiction to social media. This happens, but it's being exposed now. So more people, I think, have that speed bump where they're both aware of what's been happening in the business of social media. And people like Tristan Harris, Center for Humane Technology, Asa Raskin, they've been quoting Charlie Munger, who said, if you want to measure the outcomes, look at the incentives. And if we look at things like social media 1.0, the incentives were on our eyeballs, our attention, and not really giving back to people a quality of feeling like it enhanced their well-being at the end of the engagement. So examples like that tell me, okay, those speed bumps are good. Now we have ways that we can kind of set our own limits in advance, because as humans, we are sucked into things that have certain dopamine triggers. We don't want that ideally. And people are starting to become more, like I call it, we have our spidey sense. Like they're starting to become more aware when they have that that feeling of just being in an endless loop of not
doom scrolling.
Yeah, exactly.
In an Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole that we can't get out of.
And yet you bring up flow state. And I love, Rodney Mullen, the skateboarder, he wrote one of the pieces in this book, and it's an interlude in chapter 8, because he and I were talking a lot about creativity and flow state. More people I find want to understand what it is happening in their body and in their mind when time kind of stands still and they feel like they're in their element. Now we can do more. And that's part of what I focus on in the book and in the work I do. How do we prime for flow? Mm-hmm. How do we treat it like an emergent kind of power that we have, where you can say, oh, I want to set up my life so that I prioritize being in that state, just like an athlete wants to prime their bodies to not just perform at their best, but get to experience that joy.
Get into that flow state.
Yeah,
How
for
beautiful.
you. And you might have an audience, but in a way, who cares? Like if you're in your flow, when people are attracted to that energy, there's hope, there's positivity, there's community. So so I'm all about building that as a collective movement where people understand more about themselves and know also that they're not alone if they're not always experiencing joy and wonder and happiness as emotions.
I love that. It's tricky for us to find a way to get there. I think that's the hard part is we want to have joy in life. Who doesn't want that? Yeah. I don't know that enough of us know what wonder is these days. And you talk about it in, how as children, we're so curious, we experience it so frequently.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the types of keys that you have, like some of your design principles to take us there? There's some tips we could get into if we start with one of those. And I also love that you call yourself an experienced designer and an imagination architect. Yeah. And I love this. It's almost like you're empowering us to design our own lives in some way and imagine our own blueprints for laying a foundation of a better life. So take us through, how do we reach joy and wonder more regularly? Yes.
In a non-prescriptive way, because you're going to get there and your way might be different than someone else's. Internal connection to external joy and wonder. I gave a workshop. I'm thinking of examples where I could go into this and really give you something that's very specific, because for me, there's the abstract, and I think in an abstract way, my brain has tendrils that tend to be branching out from a topic. When you say, how can I? First of all, that's an Ellen Langer term with mindfulness that basically means something's possible. Like you're dwelling in possibility by saying, how can I, instead of can
Will I ever get there?
Will I ever? Can I? She says, don't say, can I swim? Say, how can I swim? And then you start to learn the strokes. You start to learn the ways. It's not a best kept secret. It's just starting to be more of a priority. So for example, with the Air Force, I came to give a workshop with them about resilience. And the resilience and leadership training ended up also incorporating wonder and incorporating this idea of having a fullness of presence where you can really be in your element. Because a lot of society treats topics like resilience as always be strong. Don't let your guard down. Don't lose yourself. And yet, with an element of imagination or wonder, you problem solve more easily. You're not attaching to a one fixed way, one forced outcome. So more studies on the brain are showing this, that when we can have more of a plasticity, a playfulness. It's a little bit of a paradox because you have to feel safe first, and you have to feel as if people have your back.
Mm-hmm. You talk a lot about safety.
Yeah. So Amy Edmondson talks to the researcher about psychological safety in groups. And if you have permission to rely on others, then all of a sudden, all of this, strength opens up because you suddenly realize, oh, this is not performative. I don't have to make up the answers. I can lead there and use my collective wisdom of a group. So, at the end of the book, I talk about one of my predictions, and it is that people are going to operate more as a collective in the future, more like birds do as they flock, more co-sensing and cooperative movements.
I think of a beehive.
We need that.
They organize and work together, and everyone has a role. They're all participating.
Yep. And it's a concept of relational trust, but what does it look like? You asked earlier, how do I get there, or how do I begin? First off, it's beginning with a growth mindset. Like, what does it mean to have curiosity over knowing all the answers? Because that's going to lead you into a direction where you'll get more inferences along the way. This book has examples of that and real exercises that people can have. And when they focus on wonder, what you're actually doing is telling yourself, what am I curious about? And also with wonder, you have conditions. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote about this in a book called Flow. There are conditions for flow and wonder that involve releasing attachment. Sometimes it's attachment to identity. Like, if you want this exercise as a leader, you would stop asking, what would Kira do in this moment? Because then you're unwittingly kind of leading into your own expectation. You operate without that fixed identity and more like children do so easily, which is why kids are so great at wonder, because they can look at the sky and wonder why it's blue. They can look at another human and wonder what their perspective is. Mm-hmm. And they can also drop out of that attachment to time and space and place. And now I'm going to make another leap. Guess where we do this really well?
Virtual reality.
Virtual reality. Yeah. So for me,
our favorite space
where I'm not trying to lead people like that's the answer, but hey, if you want to flex your muscles and you want to try out what it means to have a different way of looking at the world, then you get to embody an avatar or a ball of light or something. And then
it's so funny that you said about our attachment to our identity, and I started to think about that quickly. And am I attached to my avatar these days? Mm-hmm. Because I've spent so much time working with a designer, right? Mm-hmm. My avatar in VR chat, for example, is designed to look like me. It was meant to speak on a panel for the Venice Film Festival. It has an outfit that I would have worn, mm-hmm. wonderful avatar designer that I've worked with, Rhea Goldson. We crafted that very carefully. And then there's a party dress avatar. But something that I've loved, and I haven't done it in a while, I haven't changed avatars in a while. I've kind of been associating with myself. So I wonder if that's a limitation of my own identity at the moment. And that something that I've loved about those worlds is the ability to be a spaghetti noodle or, desaturated, totally black and white, or almost like my shadow self, something very different that I'm almost afraid of. And the ability to change scale and size.
Right. Scale, size, another type of human, another creature. It can be used for empathy. It also doesn't have to be a teach you a lesson type of experience. I think that what I'm seeing happen is more people curious about things like neurodiversity, how people think and learn and share. And I often forget what I look like because I'm in VR and I'm just super curious, and I might be able to float, or I might be able to populate an object, or have music that represents feelings and then be able to sketch in colors and create shapes. So I think, again, one of my go-tos is yes, and it's awesome that we can be attached to our avatars in certain ways and feel like, oh, I love that outfit, or I love that I got to choose that hairstyle, and have really wild colors, or whatever you feel like. I feel it's a chance to give both permission and also say, hey, this is a space where there's a certain amount of levity And there's also a gravity. That's another one of the phrases I'll say. People can be very closely emotional with each other and really vulnerable. So that's another reason why I think XR, VR, this extended reality and virtual reality worlds can be liberating in so many ways that offer freedom.
Right. They take us into a space of wonder automatically. I agree with you on this, on virtual reality and embodying an avatar, this spatial dimension, and we could talk later about spatial computing. I do think that they can be very vulnerable spaces. I've met people that I've dated in life through virtual reality. I've had, very, crossing time and space with dear colleagues during the pandemic that were dealing with what was happening in Milan in the heart of a very scary time, and finding a closeness and just being present with each other and almost just reaching out with your hand to kind of touch through virtual space and really feel. It sounds perhaps crazy, but you can really feel the presence of someone else. I do think co-presence is possible in these spaces. And they're also spaces where we can have very serious conversations and problem solve. And I think it's interesting that you've led scientists into some of these spaces. You talk about an experience bringing people to the moon through virtual reality. So you're taking a group, I can only imagine everyone in their home, powering up their devices, transporting themselves. We're going where? We're going to the moon in VR, and then you're guiding them through a meditation and poetry. What was it like? What did you witness when you brought that group of people through that experience?
So there were layers. So first it has to start with trust. So sometimes, because I've led several groups to the moon, I'm thinking, I've led LinkedIn to the moon. I've had experiences with different groups, the State Department, a group of architects and people who were archaeologists in Egypt specifically. We were taking artifacts and working with them in a play space that simulated their real environment. And then for one of those experiences, I said, let's go to the moon. What did it feel like? It felt to me as if sometimes people will be on a Zoom call together and we'll start off on Zoom. And then to peel back the layers, it's a hero's journey. So I want people to drop away from their mechanical brain trying to deconstruct, this fidelity is really good. Or, and
it doesn't very photorealistic.
Yes. Oh, look at this environment. How, was this coded in Unity? You want them to, again, ride the ride. There's a beautiful book that I love by Orhan Pamuk. He wrote the book Snow, if you know that book. He has a book called The Naive and Sentimental Novelist. And he basically says when you're in an experience, you can either be naive and just say, whoa, oh my gosh, look at this. Or you can be sentimental and you can say, Caitlin's doing this right now. Or, wow, Kira's having an amazing experience. And then you're almost creating a third person of yourself. I say to people, watch out if you refer to yourself in third person in your own head, because then you might not be in the experience as much as observing yourself in the experience. Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you're in these virtual environments too, and you see your avatar run ahead of yourself, there is a disconnect, but then you get to be embodied again.
The example of starting on Zoom, sometimes people are in two places in their head. So usually I'll prime by having that session where I teach the technique and the technical aspect, so then they can cross over the threshold. A lot of people aren't used to VR, but I don't want it to be a best kept secret. I want the accessibility to be more affordable. I want people to be able to either on their browser or in a headset go into that space. So I do part 2 where we just drop away from Zoom. We're only in that one space. We're not conscious anymore of being between two worlds. And those people that I was with, we knew we were physical humans because we had seen each other on the Zoom call. So we already knew, okay, we're all around the world. We're connecting in this space and time. And then they crossed over into VR, dropped away from the Zoom the second time we met, or third time, fourth time. When we went to the moon, it can give me goosebumps because we were really there. Of course, it was more of a simulation of being on the moon, but people had their spacesuits as avatars. We had this kind of buoyancy to the way we were moving. And I could notice people. I asked them afterwards, were you fully present? And they said, yes. Like my awareness was in that pure moment together on the moon, looking at planet Earth. And you have that experience of the overview effect, like an astronaut, where the boundaries between countries broke down. You know, I didn't impose that meaning on them, saying you will have a profound takeaway, but they had it because they were there looking at Earth saying, hey, we're all over the world and we're having this international connection here on the moon, looking at our planet in a different way.
And looking at reality in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? You've just shifted their perspective by putting them in this new environment and giving them this opportunity to look back through eyes of wonder. And obviously, what the research and work that the Virtual Human Interaction Lab has been doing at Stanford, we look at all of that cognitive understanding of what is happening. We really do believe that we're in these spaces. Does technology, digital technology, virtual technology, does it take us further from our bodies, closer to our bodies? Is it case by case?
Part of my goal, my feeling of intention and also a calling, is to bring people an opportunity to connect with what is somatic. So when I wrote about S's of XR design, somatic and storied and soulful and sensory were the 4 S's that I added to that idea of something that's shared and social and spatial. Because usually people will say, oh, an XR experience. And I'm glad I could remember all 7 on the spot.
I was going to say, these are your 7 S's.
There's a beautiful article about it if people want to read. But I think, first off, you mentioned VHIL. Jeremy Bailenson and his team have done great research about everything to do with virtual humans and the interaction design. And we mentioned crossing into VR, and crossing out is equally important to have that space for reflection. People are tender. They come out and they've had an experience, and sometimes this is where leadership can process the experience with people, guide them to have reflection exercises, and not have it be prescriptive, but have it be kind of like after people have done something extreme in sports, or, you know, maybe kind of when people say drink water, drink water after these experiences. Let yourself have some moments to decompress and also just be, because that human presence, you have an experience like this and you start to question everything that came before. And that comes up a lot for people. So I think your question is really precise, and I want to make sure I honor it. I think you asked something about, will digital applications bring us closer to our human self in the future? Is that the way?
Can they? And closer to our human bodies.
Yeah. At this moment, I think there's evidence that they can distract us quite easily, kind of what I was mentioning before about the dopamine and people's addictions and sort of but that's the Charlie Munger of, are the measures actually matching where the incentives are? In a beautiful world where humans have agency, and that's what this book is giving tools and frameworks for. If we have agency, digital can give us more awareness, everything from certain amounts of biofeedback. I'm looking to see if you're wearing a watch giving you biofeedback, but yeah,
this one is more analog. Yes.
I'm wearing nothing, but we get to choose. Some people, there's a chapter in the book on wearables and well-being. And again, it's not saying that more is better. It's saying, take the conditions of your life and feel whether something that's digital gives you a better understanding of yourself and your biological form. We don't need to go away from technology to find connection, but we do have to be mindful in a way that's curiosity and creative about how we integrate. So that's where I want to be supportive, and I see my role as a guide, a mentor. I tell my students and people that I lead in workshops, design for yourself first. Like design and really feel yourself as you're creating something, because right now it is compelling, but maybe not a long-term trend to just have more digital, more access,
everywhere.
more tools,
right? More wearables, more screens,
more noise. Like, do we need more noise? No, but we might need a little bit. Like, we wouldn't have found each other if we didn't have digital. Like, you and I would not.
We met through virtual first,
right? We wouldn't have been in a physical cafe saying, "Hey, there you are."
Not with the amount of travel you do, Caitlin.
I mean, maybe we would have, but it would have been, you know what I mean? There's a yes and to that, because I've had certain amazing experiences where I'm physically traveling and I put away things and I'm just fully present for serendipity where moments happen. So
yes.
I don't
you talk about the train. There's like a train that you were taking in Vienna in Austria. Switzerland. Maybe the train was in Switzerland. You were talking about
I've taken
a train.
a lot of trains.
You were on a train and you were writing about how many people were on their devices, doing this posture, just sort of absorbed their whole body and being absorbed to the device versus looking out at the beautiful landscape around them.
Well, and it's sad, right? We're living in the most awkward time to be human. We're living in a time where if we do look closely at our phones, our physical body tends to hunch. We tend to crunch our shoulders. It's the same for computers. We don't often have a posture of something that looks positive, and our body language is really how others can see people in community. So it's totally true. I was in a Swiss train, the landscape and the lakes and everything was so beautiful, and the train car was very quiet, which is still normal. I was looking around though, and people were not smiling. They were looking at phones and frowning and kind of crouching over them and hunching. And I thought, oh no, this is one of those time periods where maybe it'll shift. Maybe we'll have some augmentation in our glasses and we'll choose whether or not to use it, and we'll be close in person to the people next to us. That's the dream, where we get to choose with intention those layers. And sometimes just peel back the layers and say, hey, we're going to have a purely physical experience. And that's also in the book.
And put the device away.
Because we get to choose. We don't have to do anything. And there's a turning away from likes and dislikes and performance. We only have this one moment, which people like John Kabat-Zinn, Mindfulness, he'll remind me, we can perseverate over the future, we can ruminate over the past, but if right now you and I just get this one now moment, how are we going to use everything to increase presence? Because that's what it should be about.
I wish there were more ways we could measure things, and I think I've really enjoyed when digital applications and social media have added just little heart possibilities. And maybe that takes me back to my theater days, my old school theater days, high school theater days of Rent, and thinking about, how do we measuring in love?
I'll start singing.
Right?
Seasons.
We'll bring 500, right? We'll start to break into seasons of love. 600 minutes.
How do
you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, and cups of coffee. Now I'm enough to license a music, right?
Yeah. So I would measure my day in cups of coffee.
Cups of coffee, you could, yes,
Yeah,
right. I would measure mine in cups of tea. But I love that, as you just said, right? Measuring in love.
In love.
Or measuring in other ways. How could we start to measure our time instead of measuring it in likes and dislikes?
Well, and how often does it turn into a commodity, right? Like we say, spend our time. We use a lot of cost language, and then we say, well, what's it worth, right? There's a lot of emphasis, I think, subliminally on words. Words have a power, even if people don't realize it. That's part of why I love words, and I choose them carefully. I always say you're invited. You're invited to reconsider. This book is a consideration. It's not saying, I have all the answers and people need to read it in this book, but it's saying, hey, maybe we don't want to adopt some of the assumptions in the way that we plan the future. Because right now we're at this moment, and we could get into AI and some of the trends. They're in,
and we should talk about them too.
And AI is deeper than a trend. Machine learning has been around for a while. How humans are going to approach and really have ethical considerations. Again, consideration. We need to be aware, and maybe the solution is not as fear-based as some of the language has been in the past. And there was something about that back to love and the measures that I think is important. It's kind of escaping me right now, but when you were saying it, I was thinking, we don't just measure a commodity of time. I know what it was. It was the part 2 of John Kabat-Zinn's conversation with me. I actually asked him this spring at Wisdom 2.0 at the conference in San Francisco, what about wonder? Because wonder is not a fixed attention on this moment. And he said, that's different. That's not perseverating over the past. And that's not ruminating and thinking about the future, but that's dreaming about what could be. And sometimes I don't see a lot of that language. I see language on, well, let's focus. Let's use mindfulness to focus on the present moment. But I don't always have to be washing the dishes when I'm washing the dishes. I can be in reverie. I can be in mind wandering and wondering, as you've seen. And that's also a creative way to dream up new solutions to problems and to exercise a leadership of possibility. So that's also in the book.
That helps too with this point that you've made about finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, and how do we kind of cope with the mundane, like doing laundry, doing dishes, all these things that could really drive us crazy. But if we can find wonder in those moments, if we can ruminate and really dream, why not use those as opportunities to do more with our mind and our being?
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean we're in la-la land. It can mean that we are fully present with our full sensory experience. I love swimming. Sometimes when I'm swimming, I meditate, and it starts with me noticing the feelings in my feet, or I'll try to feel my hands as they're moving through the water. And then I do something like a flip turn, and I look up and I see kind of the skim of the surface of the water and the light coming through. And then it's an invitation, because I'm so present and connected in that moment that my body can let go. And then I start to see the fractals of the water and the light starting to play with it. And I'm having this beautiful moment, and I mention it because you and I have talked a lot about fractals and about themes of biology that sometimes come up. And
waves within waves.
Exactly.
Yes, that came from Dr. Irving Dardick that I had met years ago, and was discovering his world of wonder as he was looking at nature.
Yeah. And imagine if instead my workout was spent counting the laps or saying, oh, I'm, burning this amount of calories. You know what I mean? So there's a sweet spot, I think, to promoting that exercise in giving yourself permission to show up in the experience. And if people find wonder or that type of thing is a hard gateway, sometimes I'll say, well, just imagine your animal body. Like, drop away from your thinking brain from the neck up and start to feel your animal body. And as Mary Oliver says, it loves what it loves.
You take us through the 6 dimensions of wellness from the National Wellness Institute, and you shared the statistic from the Global Wellbeing Index that only 32% of people felt that they had a quality of well-being. And that really struck me. It relates to something that you were just saying just a moment ago about loneliness, depression. So I want to circle on that for a moment. How do we get, what else can we do as a society to get to see each other more, to help each other out in this lifetime? What can we do when people are feeling this way?
I have applied to different places, both to serve as a mentor. So mentor for places that have well-being as their priority. I say digital well-being is part of well-being because a lot of our life is mediated by technology. It shouldn't be siloed. We need to be aware. And also, I don't think there's any panacea. I don't think there's any perfect answer to your question. I do think that the more that governments and the more that agencies understand that people are saying they're lacking well-being, then they can provide support structures. More people know right now that mental health is an issue. Thank goodness it's being destigmatized. More people have access to care. I can say in the university where I teach, there's more access for people and more, it's not just for students, but people of all ages are getting help when they need it and having that supported. So
just your course existing on digital well-being is huge.
And people can't have that level of well-being if their basic human needs are not met. So it's going to lead us toward more programming that supports people's healthcare, supports education. So I'm all about supporting those initiatives where you feel like as a society, more of your basic human needs are met. And I'd love to work with more organizations that have that cross-pollination of ideas.
Let's jump a bridge here. Let's jump through a portal into spatial computing and AI. Obviously, it's promising, it's growing. Does it take us, again, further from well-being or closer towards it?
So we just talked about loneliness, and I think it's a nice segue. I would say it takes us closer to it. And with the layered aspect, what we didn't talk about deeply was a level of ambient co-presence. I think a lot of people who use the term social think about people talking with each other, or people who have loneliness need to combat that by being very outgoing. I'm an ambivert, so I'm both an introvert and an extrovert. I like to be around other people, and I don't necessarily have to directly burst their bubble. I can feel their co-presence with me and feel that level of support. So I've seen that happening in XR environments where people are encouraged to be in co-presence with others, kind of like being in the ritual of a theater and you're looking at a production together. Or, this is, again, another level of awe where they call it this idea of collective effervescence, where you're sharing in a ritual with other people, but you don't have to be loud. You don't have to perform. You don't have to have likes and dislikes and posts with your own identity. So a lot of the ambient co-presence that I'll talk about in spatial technology and in AI-supported computing really helps people feel that level of connection, where it doesn't change their human experience with other humans. It just lets them know that there are spaces of belonging across these continuums. And that's really precise and beautiful that people are now curious about that and wanting to find out more.
You say that we're deeply missing rituals, which I think is beautiful, relates so much to the work that I've been making for the last decade and want to continue to make, where we're bringing people together. I think that art of gathering and togetherness is important. And I do see that spatial computing, these spatial environments, can bring us together across time and space and bring people from so many cultures that speak different languages together to have a shared reality. So I feel like it's possible. I hope we can continue to design for that.
It's totally possible. And again, the end goal, a lot of this book explores spatial computing so that people feel like they have a better understanding of it. And it's not the end goal for all of us to be there as opposed to being here. You can choose to be very physical with this book and understand that there are different layers with intention that you could start to adopt if they served your purpose. So I think in the future, we will have these communities that go into these different spaces together. And ideally, leaders are never afraid to ask the question, what is technology serving? What does it mean to have 3D technology? Because if we're 3D creatures, we're going to start to exist with 3D spatial computing that's a total different level than hunching and disappearing into computer screens. So this book teaches people and allows them to feel more empowered about having that understanding so that then they can make a decision that really fits their life, their team's lives.
You have a lot of different areas that you've designed and you're giving us in the book, and also in some of your prior books and work, you're building upon it here. You're designing these principles that we can use to apply, whether we're building virtual spaces or telling stories or trying to be better leaders in our businesses. Can you take us through your 3 A's?
Sure. And it's a great question because I have a lot of purposeful frameworks that are in the book. And the 3 A's are one of the frameworks where people can see how to exercise this type of awareness, which has to do with the mindfulness quality of being present in a moment. So for people who say to me, I'm not a mindfulness person, I'm not a meditator, but how do you show up in the moment and exercise a designer's mindset to be a leader who's also a creator? So the 3 A's are actually the design principles that let you adopt mindfulness. The first A, as I've said before, I've been dropping the word, it's awareness. So awareness of your senses and also your goals and really what the big picture is, because a lot of people get lost in the weeds. They're trying to exercise something, or they see digital and tech and they lose awareness about everything from physicality to what they're actually doing and what the point is and who the team that they're serving is. So awareness actually allows people to be very strategic, and I have guides in there. The second A is advancing. And it's not performative, but it means, again, if you're aware of yourself and you've done a little bit of goal analysis, then you understand your compass. You understand that you're going to be growing and that you're going to encourage other people to take those safe risks, to have that psychological safety. You're going to advance toward a place where you're not satisfied with the status quo. More people are working from home now. More people have a certain amount of flexibility, but just having more freedom doesn't tell people, well, what are you actually prioritizing? So that idea of advancing is the idea of taking goals and actually being intentional about directing toward it. And that's an exercise in mindfulness as well. And the third A in this design mindset is actually authenticity. So because I took the first 2 A's and I was thinking about some of my background in meditation and mindfulness, and I thought it's not enough to be aware and be advancing, because you have to be, ironically, non-judging. You have to be supple, you have to be kind to yourself and to other people. And how do you embody compassion without doing what Brené Brown talks about so well, which is, be vulnerable, be willing to be seen as human, and get rid of all of the guilt and shame that might have been somehow unwittingly put on us. You know what I mean? Like, I had to get really humorous about it because I'm a recovering pleaser. Like, I'm somebody who wants a community to always feel good. Mm-hmm. And what happens when I allow myself to be seen as human, be seen as fallible? People trust me more. Mm-hmm. They'll say, oh yeah, you are showing your awareness. You're showing your actual level of compass, that I have an advancing mindset, but I'm not just strategically going for the gold without saying to people, hey, we're all in this together and I'm a human in this process. I recently thought I should add a 4th A, which is agency, because the more that we can exercise that as leaders, it's not enough to say, this is the goal, let's do this. I have to say, hey, and here's a way you can help. Because other people want to take part in this collectivism. And I think the top-down leadership strategies are starting to change to more lateral formations, where if you're authentic, then you're going to say to somebody else, I see you now, and I see that you have abilities and you're aware, and here's some agency to go about making a change that's part of our structure.
I feel like now you're inspiring me to make a set of new principles. Caitlin, maybe we can write them together.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something to follow. So as I recap, those 3 A's were awareness, advancing, authenticity.
You got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And it's not prescriptive. There could be 4th and 5th and, but those spoke to me coming from the essence of mindfulness and leading people away from just a buzzword into some way to embody that as we're designers.
Are you ready for rapid fire?
I'm ready for rapid fire.
Okay, we call this the lightning round.
I love this.
Here we go.
Okay.
Sky or terrain?
Sky.
Earth, water, wind, fire.
Right now, fire.
Force, time, shadow, light.
Shadow.
AR, VR, MR.
VR.
If you could invite one person from history to put on a VR headset, who would it be?
One of my favorite writers, Marguerite de Yourcenar, to put it on. And then I'd ask her to take it off and to also give it to Desmond Tutu.
If you could retake a school subject over again in VR, what subject would it be?
Calculus.
What would you say to your younger self?
I would say to my younger self, have a lot of fun and stay curious because good things are coming. Yeah. And maybe get more sleep. At certain years, like teenage years or
You checked in
years.
with your younger self at different points. Yes.
Sleep is so good. Sleep is universally good for everybody. So I'm saying that to my younger self and everybody listening, that sleep is awesome.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I dream about flying. Specifically, I would like to fly by inhaling. And when I inhale, I levitate because I really want to float above the earth.
Have you experienced that in VR?
I have. And it's beautiful and wonderful. I want to build it even more delightfully and keep dreaming about it.
If aliens were arriving tomorrow and you've been chosen to deliver the message, what would you say?
I would say, please know how open and curious I am and tell me things that you've learned that you think could be helpful for us. And probably I would try to hug them. I'd want to have some kind of haptic experience. People want to be seen and heard. And I've heard that the universal way of greeting is to be like this because it kind of shows people I'm open, I'm unarmed, I'm curious. So I definitely would be doing this kind of body language, and I would be super curious about what they've learned. I have a friend who's a mathematician. That's why the calculus answer came. But he said always in his head, he's dreaming about worlds that are possible. And then within those worlds, what conditions would have to be true. And that's how he comes up with new math concepts. There's a high probability that there is life on another planet. The question is in this place and time of communicating. And this is coming from him. He won the Fields Medal, and we were talking about it after I covered The Man Who Knew Infinity as a journalist. So long story short, he said to me, the issue that a lot of physicists and high-level mathematical thinkers are saying is, how did another society, like if there is life on a different planet, how can we learn how to exist and thrive together? Because communities, as they become more intelligent, need to be co-sensing and collectively compassionate for survival.
That's a great message to leave us with.
I think so.
People can find your book where? On Amazon.
I can find my book on Amazon. Also on my website, you can find my book at CaitlinKrause.com. And I'm a big fan of independent bookstores. So you can go to whatever bookstore is your favorite, but if you want to have tips for different city locations, I have some listed. And you can find out more about the research, the background at CaitlinKrause.com. I'd like to add that our greatest gift is our time and attention. So I'm super grateful to be sitting down with you in live presence in this space.
In this magical space.
Yep.
It's surrounded by nature. We're in a really beautiful location.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
It's a very special time.
I felt like I could just be here and celebrate. Thank you for celebrating with me.
You've written, it's so beautiful, Caitlin. I have so many quotes. I could read the whole book out loud. Like there's a lot. There's tips in here. There's ways to reflect on what you're writing about and start to practice it, and incredible design principles that are very deep and very applicable. And then there's just a poetry in your writing that I think is beautiful. So thank you.
I am also grateful. So thank you for having me here, and it's a pure pleasure.
Thank you for entering the portal with me. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the next stage of storytelling, like and subscribe so that you can catch all of our episodes. If you're ready for more, jump through the portal into the next episode. If you've got a vision for your own immersive production, partner with Double I Studios and bring the future of storytelling to life today. May you stay curious, open, and embrace the future. I'll see you at the next act.